Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Crew First Culture podcast. Super excited to be with one of my good friends, Benjamin Martin, today. By the way, my name is Jeremy, and we are going to get into some things that I've been waiting to discuss because I I need some more information to make some choices, kind of like a few of the last episodes that we've had, just really kind of rethinking how things have always been done, rethinking what I know about things, and really just digging into what just the simple thing of what words mean and how they're impacted in our lives. So just throwing that out real quick. If anybody hasn't heard of you or known you, Benjamin, give us a as much or little intro as you want to, and we'll get into it.
I think I'll focus on the latter. If you want to know more about what we've got going on, the website's Embrace Resistance, but the skinny of it is I've known Jeremy for a while, and I've been traveling the country and teaching leadership stuff for about 7 years, and a lot of it has come from having to rethink what I'm doing because it either didn't work at all, or it worked, but I wasn't sure why it worked, and just really trying to understand the nuts and bolts of people. And the class that probably most people have seen is the Intoxicated Leadership class, where we focus on why feelings and emotions are driving us more than strategy are, and how to get in front of that as leaders and kind of reclaim that. But that's probably about as much as matters to this conversation anyway.
All right. So today we're going to talk about expectations. And like I said, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm glad that we had time to sit down and talk about it, and for me to learn from you, and hopefully lots of other people listening to learn from you. But really what we're going to be talking about is expectations, the good, the bad, the ugly, and maybe most importantly, alternatives for that. And so kind of just throwing that out there, what led to this is when Jared Sergi and Mark Lone were with me, and we talked about mission, vision, and purpose. And I believe it was Sergi kind of brought you up in that conversation and kind of brought up the expectation type thing. And so that really had my gears turning as far as maybe that's something else I need to dig into. So that being said, you shared with me a little bit about kind of a situation that led you to really start rethinking setting expectations and all that. So just kind of, I'll throw it out to you and kind of tell us where you're at and kind of where you've been and what's brought you to a little bit of a change of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I'd add is if you found this podcast, but you haven't had a chance to listen to the one that Jeremy's referencing with Mark Alone and Jared Sergi, please go back and listen to that, because they had a fascinating, very informative conversation about leadership and strategy and mission and purpose. And that's the stuff that kind of got my gears turning, which is why I reached out to Jeremy to talk about some of the unique positions that I have. So to what Jeremy is asking me to talk about, I don't think necessarily that expectations are a great leadership tool, especially the way we use them. And I've had a couple instances where this has been validated for me on a larger scale. And then for the most part, the day-to-day kind of validates that this is the case. But what I want you to know is that this is situational. This is not an absolute. If they're working for you and the way you do it, then they're working for you, and don't mess that up. But if they're not working for you, then this is the kind of stuff that I'd like you to kick around in your head and see what works. So the first story is going back to being a company officer for the first time. I was super excited. I had read the books, taken the classes, talked to people. A lot of what we do as leaders is modeled for us. I think, unfortunately, we don't do enough development ahead of the promotion or the opportunity. So we kind of do what our parents did, or what the senior firefighter did, or even what our officers did along the way. And if we had good ones, then that's great. But if we didn't have some good ones, then unfortunately, we might have more bad habits than we realize. And I had expectations like anybody did. Jared mentioned to you that I called them an exercise in vanity, because man, I loved writing those, and I loved reading them to people. I loved showing them to people. I was so proud of those things. And I think I was on 2 pages when I started, single spaced. Had a lot to say, had a lot to say. And I noticed that as much as I talked about them, they didn't really change our operations. I had a good crew. They really didn't. They didn't add anything. I mean, not so much as even salting the food, to taste a little bit differently. They just kind of went and ran. And then I noticed that when we had some people change out and we weren't so great, they didn't make a difference either. And I was like, well, what the heck? I thought these things were these all important tool. And so I stumbled for a while and I kept giving them, but still not really understanding what I was doing with them and whether they actually were needed. Until I got to my second assignment. And then I had a rookie, and I sat down with him and I was like, if anybody needs expectations, it's a rookie. And so at this point I had gotten to a single page of expectations and started reading them, and he had a copy and I had a copy, and I would talk about one of them and then ask what he thought about it, and see if he had any life experience that he could relate it to, or career experience elsewhere, or volunteer experience, or whatever it is. Like, I needed it to be alive and not just words on the page for him. And it was something to the effect, because I no longer have them, and about, when you're at work, don't be toxic. And it was much more elaborate than that, maybe a couple sentences, but that was the essence of it. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean by don't be toxic? And I was just flabbergasted. I was like, how do you not know? How have you been in the fire service and not seen or known at least one toxic firefighter? Maybe my agency is the only one that has them, but I doubt it.
Right.
And he didn't, and when I thought about it, he just spent the last 7.5 months in our academy, and obviously they're getting the best of the best there. And he didn't have any other career experience, and he was 22 years old. He didn't have, thank God, he didn't have toxic people in his life. And if he did, he couldn't relate that word to their behaviors. And so what's interesting to me, if I had said, hey, just read this, let me know if you have any questions, maybe he asks me that question, maybe he doesn't. Or I'm going over it with him and I don't give him a chance to ask questions. And I'm just kind of looking for a verbal nod of, yeah, I got it. But it really didn't set him up for success. But what it did do, I think more so, is let's fast forward a year, and he's been running some calls and he's seen some things. He's met some of these toxic firefighters. Again, he may not be able to articulate that, hey, you're toxic. He just, recognizes that behavior is kind of really, really salty and negative around the table. And I come up to him and I'm like, hey, man, by the other day, the thing you did, yeah, I told you one of my expectations is don't be toxic when you're at work, right? So now I'm going to do my job as a leader. And he's going to look at me and go, is that what you meant by that? And at what point, did the expectation actually help him? And certainly what point did it change his behavior? And I don't have an answer for that. So my reply to that was I developed a separate set of expectations, one for the rookie, and then one for all the senior firefighters along the way. And then over the years, I've been doing a formal leadership position now as an acting battalion for the last 12 years. It's really changed the way that I use those, and even that word as itself. And this is a story that I shared with Jeremy that I think got his attention. I was asked by my boss, who was the shift commander, to go down and talk with a new officer about his expectations, because we were concerned about some of what was happening with his crew. And it'd been, I think, maybe about 3 months, and we hadn't seen the changes that we had hoped to as a command team. And so I said, sure, no problem. I'll drive down there. And he's not in my battalion, but this is something that they know that I'm passionate about doing. And so I'm happy to fall on these swords and have these conversations. And so I walk in and he's already been informed why I'm there. And so I just make sure that we're on the same page, that I'm here to just kind of review his expectations and see what questions he has. And maybe there's some stories I can share that kind of helps him figure out his learning a little bit faster and not make the same mistakes I did. And he hands me the same thing, 2 pages of expectations. I start looking ahead of them while he's talking, which is probably pretty common as he's giving them, for people to do. So I'm on a different expectation he is. And they're all perfectly fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these things. And they're probably very familiar. You've probably seen similar ones or have similar ones where it's like, early is late and super early is on time, and on time is late. And it's like, be here early. And then it lists all the reasons, the benefits of being here early. And, for us, we've had a change in the culture where we're not turning out while we're driving down the road, or shouldn't be. And so he's got a 9 in there, wear your seatbelt, don't turn out, do a 360 around the truck before you move it. And they're all things that you can operationalize perfectly fine. And so he gets to about the 4th one and he's reading it. And I know the firefighters that he's working with, right? And he's got strong firefighters and he's got some firefighters that are not as strong. And we'll just say that some are more motivated than others. And he gets to the 4th one and I said, hey, go ahead and put your piece of paper down and keep giving me your expectations. And he looks at me confused. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, put your expectations down, turn them over, and then tell me what you expect from me. And he's like, well, I can't do that. I don't have them memorized. And I was like, so do you carry that around with you in your pocket and you get it out and you reflect on it to make sure that they're meeting your expectations? He goes, well, of course not. And I said, do they? And he's like, no. I'm like, so what is the purpose of your expectations then? And I was like, do you understand how if you're coming in here and you're changing the total trajectory of your shift, that 32 different line items is going to be a little bit confusing for them? And that, in your mind, if they don't do the 32nd item on there, but they've done the 31, is that good enough for you? Like, are these weighted? Does some matter more than others? And having that conversation with him, I didn't want to discourage him from using them, but I really needed him to understand why he was using them and when to use them. And so one of the things that I had recommended to him was the thing that Sergey brought up. And he asked just some different questions than what I asked, but the principle was the same. When people are processing you and they're trying to figure out the changes that you represent, less is more. Like you cannot overwhelm them. And just because it's natural to you doesn't mean it is to them. And a lot of times you're going to come in and you're going to ask them to do stuff they're already doing. And that's just focusing on what's going right. And it feels good to everybody. It doesn't send up any alarms in anybody's head that this guy's going to be a micromanager. Like, it's a lot of get to know, like, oh, this person thinks like me, like this is going to work. But if you ever worked for somebody that came in and just was like, nope, and started moving stuff, and you're like, oh my God, so much uncertainty about the day and where equipment's stored, and they probably didn't appreciate your opinion. And now you've got a guy that's been assigned to the station for 20 years and you're a brand new officer and you're changing his world. And you're like, oh, but I gave you expectations. And so, like, to your question, Jeremy, it's just a very small piece of it. It is a tool in your leadership box. And I'll let you ask some questions about anything I've said so far, and then I'll tell you about the questions that I asked and then what I see the specific purpose of those tools being.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, that's absolutely, when you kind of told me that, it was like a, wow, maybe I am doing this way wrong. And you've always heard, if you've got expectations, then, you're going to fail, because people are people. You're not going to get somebody to meet all your expectations, just like you're not going to meet everybody else's. And so there's always been a little bit of that, but still part of me, and maybe it's the people that I am mimicking, I guess, however you put it, of the leaders I had. It feels like some of this stuff, just like you've explained, should be written down so that we kind of know how we operate. And so, yeah, I'm just like we talked about a little bit before we started recording, and I stopped myself because we're obviously going to talk about it here, but that's basically where I'm at. I've got at least a page of expectations, and it's not, I hate micromanagers. And just the fact that now the way you're kind of describing that, I see that maybe that is a little bit of micromanaging, but in my head, I'm justifying it because, like one of them says, on accidents on, streets, highways, whatever, we're going to wear our safety vest. Why that's in there is because I know my battalion chief, it's a big deal to him. Am I so concerned that is going to save our lives? Not really. I mean, come on, if they're not going to see cones and trucks and all that, is a safety vest going to make it big? Whatever. I know that it's a big deal to my boss, and so it's in there. But like you said, does it need to be in there, or can it just be something to where it's just what we do? And if somebody doesn't do it on scene, when we're back at the house, I'm like, hey, let's wear our safety vest next time. And it's fixed, you know what I mean? And so I'm definitely kind of, I feel like my eyes are opening to the fact that I do need to make some changes like you've talked about. And so that being said, yeah, I'll get into kind of where that went, I guess.
Yeah, so let's use yours as an example. is there a policy in your organization that says on traffic accidents, we want you to wear safety vests?
Yes.
All right. So your expectation then is redundant, basically,
Yes.
right? So,
Yep.
but not to the point that it's completely without utility. So what's perfect about it is how long did it take you to figure out that this is something that's on your boss's radar, that he's going to pay more attention to that policy versus other policies? Because you can't, like, let's get this out. If you're on this podcast and you're thinking that people are going to follow the letter of the law, including yourself, 100%, you're wrong. You're not going to do it. I don't care how engaged you are. I don't care how great you are. And you're great because you're listening to this, right? You're trying to get better. You're not going to do it. It's impossible to do it. Okay. So those are the sidelines on the football field to keep us within bounds, but players go out of bounds and we have to reset the play. And that's what leadership's about, is kind of refereeing that, determining when we've really gone out of bounds versus when we think they're just up against it. So that's a perfect example of how really what we're doing is trying to create certainty for our folks about where the majority of their efforts should be centered. Now, perfect segue into how I try to use these now. I'm trying to think about whether it makes more sense to talk about how to use them versus why to use them first. So let's go to the why piece first. So you're a brand new officer, Jeremy, you get here and this crew has been together. And when you're looking at why they're successful or why they're failing, the culture of that shift is probably the number one ingredient. And when I say the culture of that shift, what I'm talking about is it's all of the norms that group has. And so many of those happen unconsciously. And a lot of them happen above the letter of the law. So if the letter of the law says be here by 7 a.m. for shift change, a lot of great shifts are there an hour early. And you're not going to find that written in policy anywhere, right? Like that sideline is way wide, but these guys are playing it in the middle of the field because they realize it's the most efficient. And all it takes is a couple of times of hanging out with your brother or sister on a call, and even at 6:30, right? Like if your group is there at 6:30 and you get there at 6:45 and a call comes in at 6:31 and everybody but one person gets relieved, you're going to hear about it. And you're like, no, man, 6:45, I'm 15 minutes early. Don't try to hang that on me. And like the nice thing about culture is so much of it is reinforced by peers. The leader actually does not do much in terms of forming the culture, because the culture is usually formed by the group. And the way things work in the culture is we do some things, a lot of times they're in policy, and they work. So we do them again, and they work. So we do them again. And then at some point you stop memorizing the policy and these actions become habits and routines. And, that's why catching a call right at shift change and you're all discombobulated is so hard for you mentally to recover. Or if your day gets shot to shit first thing in the morning when the battalion calls, like, oh, I hate to drop this on you, but I need you up here to support the recruit training all day. And you're like, had all this stuff planned. That's what that speaks to. So when you're new and you're walking in, they already have a culture. They've already got a way of winning in their mind. Now, they might be winning and they might be bad news bears. And so you're going to have to kind of figure that out. But are you going to figure that out in the first conversation you have with them as a group or as an individual, in a day, in a shift, in a week, in a cycle, in a month, in 6 months, in a year? Like, at what point do you figure it out? And in the interim, so many people will rush to drop those expectations and be like, hey, these are 10 things I need you to do. And a winning group's going to look at you and be like, we're already doing these 10 things. Hey, here's 5 more we're doing that really helps winning. And if you want to be successful here, you're going to do those things for us. That's what a strong group's going to tell you. I've had that. And then a weak group's going to look at you and be like, whatever, like, hey, this be here early. How do you want to enforce that? And that's terrible. Like, you want to completely deflate your leadership credibility out the gate, do that. And that's exactly what someone who wants to walk the sidelines and play the letter of the law and only do what's enforced in policy or do as little as expected is going to say. Like, hey, that's great. Be here at 6. I'll be here at 6:59. And now they've challenged you in front of the group. Like, what are you going to do about it? You put yourself in a defenseless position. And so it's like, if words were like water on your truck and your booster tank, and they were limited until somebody else came along and was able to give you more, you got on a hydrant. Like, where would you use your words? And like, that's for me is leadership. That's influence. You're only going to let me talk to you so much, Jeremy, until you make up your mind about me. And then if it's good, you'll let me have more influence with you. If it's bad, then you're going to start marginalizing what I'm trying to tell you. And I may not be a micromanager, but very quickly you're going to think I am. And where that's going to come from is I'm going to try to use these expectations to change your behavior, and you're not going to like how that feels. So I always tell people, if you're a new officer, like brand new to the role, the opportunity of leadership, then paying attention to the culture and coming in and really trying to get your feet underneath you is much more useful to me than trying to come in and lay down stuff on the letter of the law. Because really all people are looking for is, are you going to support what I'm doing, or are you going to antagonize what I'm doing or ask me to change? And nobody likes change, including us. So really, if we replace the word expectation with certainty, then I think we'd be much more useful. When you come in as a new officer, how do I create certainty for these guys about who I am? And what do they care about? Are you going to be the guy that busts me in the balls every day? Or are you going to be my friend? And the answer is neither. You shouldn't be totally their friend, and you shouldn't bust them in the balls every day. Like, I'm going to be the boss, but it does mean I can have very rich relationships with you, and we could be best friends. Like, I've got like several of my best friends are guys that I have supervised and now are either my peer or have been promoted above me. And I love the fact that, I've had access to their careers and they continue to help mine and I get to help theirs. It's awesome. And so we're friends, but they made that decision. They didn't walk up against the sidelines. Those guys were middle of the field. And so I didn't have to spend a lot of time with them clarifying, hey, don't do that, don't do that. And so the first time I did, or maybe said something to them in that leadership role, they received it well. And that's me being conscious too. That's not just me being a dick of saying like, I can say whatever I want to say because I'm an officer and you just got to deal with it. So they reacted to that well because I presented it well, because it meant a lot to me that it did go well, because I wanted to continue things as a team to go well. And because of that, we share a lot of things alike, and that's how friendships develop. And I can lean on those friendships to change behavior. You better believe it. Like, if a buddy of mine tells me something and he's serious about it, I'm going to give that a lot more thought than some of the fire chiefs that I know, because I don't really know them, and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. But somebody I respect, even that's not ranked, comes in and says like, hey, Ben, you need to really think about this. I'm going to give it some thought, because they've earned that. And that's what it matters with that relationship. And there's so much feedback we leave on the table because we're scared to say it to somebody and we're scared of their reaction. And that works both ways. There's things that I'm doing as a leader that's not working that my folks won't share with me because they're afraid of how I'm going to react. And that goes back to that certainty piece. Once you get that rub out of like, Ben's not a hothead, he's not going to yell at me, I just need to go tell him what it is, and he'll think about it. And knowing Ben, he'll think about it a lot. And he's probably going to ask me some questions. And those aren't to try to marginalize or minimize my position or even defeat it. It's because he really wants to be able to think about it and support it and make sure that it works across the multiple levels of whatever roles and responsibilities the organization has given him. And then we'll make a decision. Like, that's Ben. He's not going to probably just give me a quick answer. He's going to really want to think about it. But I've also worked around Ben enough to know that he loves the gray. And like, he wants you to make decisions for yourself, and he'll do everything he can to help you make decisions for yourself. But you got to make a decision, or he'll make one for you. And like, you got to own that decision. If you keep making decisions and there's no ownership, then you're going to have more conversations with me, because I need you to be able to do that. That's the old, like, you can do something different. Just tell me why you did it. You ever heard something like that? Yeah. Like, just tell me why. Like, as long as you can not even defend, because that's such a negative connotation. If you can support,
just show there's
your
a
decision
thought process.
Yeah, just show me what your thought process is, because it might honestly, God, to be better than mine. And this is the thing I have got to remember as I move up in the organization, and I think every leader should. Like, the further I move away from what the end user is doing, the more it matters to me what they think and how they feel, because there's no plan in my mind, whether it's the fire ground or whether it's some sort of change in the organization for the firehouses or the mission, that I can think of in an ivory palace, that I can have every detail of that worked out for an organization of my size for 600 people. Like, at some point, I have to understand that what I'm suggesting what I'm describing as the expectations of our organization, people are going to have to adapt to where they are, specifically a part of the county that they're in, a part of the apparatus they're on, a piece of equipment on that same apparatus in a different part of the county. Like, I have to trust that my people are doing the best for them. So, going back to the expectations thing, as a new officer, I think the best thing to do is just get your bearings. So I don't use the word expectations a lot. I do bearings, because people are going to want to know, hey, what are your expectations, Lou? Cap, battalion. I get that asked all the time. And so be humble about it. If you're a brand new officer, they know you're a brand new officer. And guess what? They've probably been around a brand new officer before. So you think they know some of the mistakes you're going to make before you make them? Yeah, probably. And who you were before you got promoted matters. You don't get a clean slate. You got baggage as a firefighter, some of that comes with you. And then likewise, if just because you did great as a firefighter doesn't mean you'll be a great officer. They're definitely different things. So I know plenty of people that, out promoted themselves. We talk about that all the time. I think it's called the Peter principle in literature, where we promote people to their level of incompetence. And part of that goes back to us, where we don't train and develop ahead of it. So that's on us too. But letting them know that, hey, the thing I like about our agency is when you get promoted at any rank, the fire chief meets with you and he's like, hey, so these are my expectations. And he slides you a piece of paper and he goes over these things and he asks you, you have any questions? And that's completely appropriate, because guess what? He's been in the agency his entire career, and he's been the fire chief for the last 4 years. So he's not the new guy on the block. And what he is giving you are the answers to the cultural problem that he has and that he sees. And these are the things that he does need you to pay attention to do it. Like, these are the things that are certainly his problem points that he needs you to use your rank and influence to help fix for him. Now, he might do the same thing if he came in from the outside and it was his first year. But I think that would be a mistake, because anytime you focus on something that's going well, that's easy and it feels good for everybody. So if they're doing it, let them do it. Don't present it that they're not doing it, because the first thing people are going to do when they see something, and they're going to get defensive and go, I'm already doing this. Why is this a thing? And so it's presented poorly, where really it's meant to say, hey, I want to emphasize this. And you're looking at it, good, I'm already doing that. It feels good. You look at a test that's got 10 questions, you're like, shit, I know the answers to 9 of these. And then you get to concentrate all your energy on solving the 10th one, because the other 9 are automatic and unconscious. And so expectations get used differently based on who you are and what role you're in. So Jeremy, when you've been in your spot for 3 years, 4 years, and you've got a good team and the team is doing things with some reflection of your leadership, then it's okay to give people that come in that are new expectations to say, hey, this is how we do business around here. A lot of it is in line with the policy, but there's a couple of things that are unique to us that I take a lot of pride in. And I want you to have awareness of that, because if you don't do those things, then you're likely to hear about it from your peers, because they expect us to do these things. And so when's the last time you gave expectations to somebody based on what your team expected of them? And really what you're trying to do is, how can I help you onboard to this group? I want to get the rub out of this, where you're trying to figure out who's who and who's what. And I never want to bias people towards it, but it's perfectly fine to say, hey, your senior firefighter on this shift is Ralph, and he's fantastic at pumping fire trucks. So you have pumping fire trucks questions, go to Ralph first. Before me, go to Ralph. It'll make him feel good. I value his knowledge. He's the guy I go to, so go to him. Is that something you write down on a piece of paper and have, but it's very much an expectation that I have. So it's anything that can help create certainty in people and their roles and their relationships too. If you intend to use your rank differently than what they may have experienced, then you want to tell them that. So I always like to try to focus on those types of meetings on, here's what you can expect from me, and here's what you can expect from this team. And hopefully, as we're having this conversation, they are visualizing about where their strengths and passions would align and help, which is going to help them feel good and be part of the team faster. And they probably have some anxieties, especially if you're a high performing team and they're not. They probably have anxieties, and if you're a leader, you've probably kicked a beehive or two and you've got some baggage. And so they're trying to figure out oh man, am I going to be the beehive he kicks, or is this going to work? And those conversations, I think, just they really help people get a sense of like, this is going to be a challenge or this is not going to be a challenge. And once you can disarm them, then you can really start to exert some of the influence you want to have, as well as be influenced. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like, your job is to be influenced as much as it is to influence, so that you can focus on things going right. And the example that really sells this for me is Little League coaching. And if you have kids and you're listening to this, watch this next time you go. Softball, baseball, whatever it is. And it's worse if the coach is a player's parent. And that's not to say you shouldn't coach your own teams, your kids' teams, you should. But just this phenomenon is so much more prevalent because there's such a tighter relationship with the coach and their son or daughter, or his or her daughter. So their kid who's never played baseball comes to the plate before. They've had practices, but this is their first game. And let's say this is like, I don't know, they just got off T-ball. So no big deal. It's not competitive. Everybody's just learning, right? They're new to the game. And so a pitch comes in and it is way over this kid's head. And his dad, who's a coach, says, don't swing at that. And the next pitch comes in, kid swings, but it hits the dirt and bounces over the plate. And the kid looks to his dad and the dad says, don't swing at that. And then the next pitch comes in, it's way outside the plate. And the kid actually steps over home plate trying to swing, misses, hasn't made any contact with the ball, looks at his dad. Dad says, don't swing at that. And that's leadership. That's most leaders. Like, we do a behavior and we're trying to do something that we've learned or that we know. And we don't necessarily look each time to the leader, but we kind of do, right? Like, sometimes we'll have conversations with ourselves. I wonder if they're going to say anything. That's looking to the leader as much as is physically looking up to the leader. Or if we talk about it with our team members, like, hey man, what do you think about this? That's also looking outward, for emphasis about whether our behavior is good or not. But every time that kid looked to his dad, the reinforcement was negative. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. The problem is our brains are not wired for negative. Don't think of a pink elephant right now, Jeremy. He might be this big. He might be this big, but whatever you do, don't picture this elephant, maybe this size, that's pink. Just don't do it. And like, how well does that work? At some point you're like, you drift into that. So what you need to be emphasizing is a positive. So every time the kid swings and misses, it's like, hey, breadbasket, here and here, son, here and here. This is where I want you to swing. And then the next one comes in and he swings and you emphasize here and here, here and here, every time. And when he makes contact for the first time, oh my God, what's the reaction going to be for that? You go freaking nuts because it feels good. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture all of the essence of your nervous system with that physical feeling of good job that we get with what the mental expectation of the behavior is. And when those things get paired, that's when things get automatic. And that's when people experience more success. So a lot of times expectations they're don't based, and we don't mean them to be, they just are. And so coming in as a new officer, getting your bearings, then you get the idea of what the team is emphasizing as culture. That then gives you an opportunity to say, hey, like 99% of this is working, but the fire chief gave me this one thing for him. That's what I got to focus on. And then that's what I shared with Sergi was the one for me, one for you, and one for my boss. So what I did specifically to me, when I got promoted to captain, I got assigned to our marine response team, which is basically a big fireboat that patrols a large river in the state and works with port authorities and has a lot of stuff to do that has nothing to do with the fire department whatsoever. Lots of politics. And I don't know anything about boats, Jeremy. It was not a great fit other than I really like water stuff. And they did do swift water, which I love doing. And what I loved more was the fact that this was a station that had, I think if I'm counting correctly, 7 different captains in the last 9 years. So think about what I'm saying in that. Think about the amount of certainty that those men and women have in their leadership, and their lieutenants too, because that's what I would supervise. I had supervised 3 lieutenants supervising 5 to 7 employees. So, just under 25 folks. Here comes another captain and he's going to ask us to change again, put the hose on the truck differently, put apparatus in different places. He's going to have different expectations. But in reality, what's their expectation? He'll be gone in 2 years. because that's what the organization has shown them. And unfortunately, it's complicated because the organization has shown them we don't really care about what you do. They haven't specifically stated that, but the fact that comparably the TRT team has had the same captain for the last 15 years, and they've had 7 in the last 9. Like you start to get a feeling of what matters most. And unfortunately, what's happened is a lot of times the people that came before me, they told them, this is not where I want to be. This is not what I want to do. I'm out. And so they left after a year. So now here I am coming in, and I've got this list of expectations I want to give them. I don't know anything about 50% of their mission. How am I going to give them expectations? But are they nervous? Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like they've heard about me. Like, oh, he's a change agent. He's going to change stuff. Oh, he was sent here to fix stuff. Like, oh, I've heard he's busted people before. He's written people out, like stuff that's true or isn't true. And so like that's going to get in the way very quickly of them focusing on what's going right. If they're focused on me as a threat, it's really going to get in the way when I'm working with them. And it's certainly not going to support any changes we need to do. And there are changes that need to be made, but hell if I know what they are. Like they're the subject matter experts and I need them. So I was very sensitive to that. But you better believe first day, hey Cap, like what are your expectations? What are your expectations? What are your expectations? And so that's when I started using bearings, because we talked about a lot of that in like when we talked about the river, having our bearings as a pilot on the boat and having our bearings on situations. And I'd been doing a lot of leadership teaching, and I started using bearings about like, well, this is my hunch. And I was very open and honest with them. Like, hey, my hunch here is that you guys don't feel supported by the organization. True or false? True. Tell me why. Give me some specific instances of what that looks like for you so I'm aware. Okay. And then you make some notes. My hunch is you guys probably are nervous that I'm here. True or false? Like, and if that's the question I lead with, like, what are they gonna say? Like they're not gonna give me the honest answer. But by the first 3 weeks, I had those conversations with pretty much everybody at that entire station, and just was very open and honest of like, I'm not a subject matter expert on that fireboat, which is really important to you guys. Now, I consider myself a hell of a fireman. So like, I can help you guys with that piece, but I'm not going to come in here and I'm not going to change your cross lays, even though I don't like what we're running on there. If you can pull that proficiently every time, then I'm okay with it. I'm going to set that aside because I feel like that would be selfish for me to come in here and change that, because I don't need you guys trying to learn a new cross lay, even if I think it's better, when I really need to shore up all the things that are going on that aren't necessarily correct, but I don't even know what those things are yet. So let's focus on what's the bread box. So what ended up happening was with each individual having a conversation, like Sergi talked about, like what's going well, what would you change, and getting my bearings for each one of those. So 3 different leaders with almost 100 years of career experience between them, by the way. And they were all, 2 of them were in the stages of kind of retiring over the next year, which had its own challenges. And everybody was nervous about that, including me, because those really were my subject matter experts. And then all the folks below them that had different needs. Some people wanted to focus on the boat. Some people had no interest in the boat. Some people were rookies and wanted to focus on the boat, but needed to focus on the engine. Some people were new ALS providers. Some people were going through acting officers. There's so many different needs. And so at the end of all those meetings, I was able to meet with each lieutenant, and I was like, hey, so here's my bearings on your shift. Like, weigh in on this and let me know. This person seems to be interested in this, and this is an opportunity to support them in this way. And this person, and this person, this, and this person, this. What do you think? Yes, no. And they would, I don't know if I see that, Ben, or yeah, absolutely, or I hadn't thought about it in that way. Yeah. And then it would be like, okay, what about you? Like, where do you see yourself in this? Where do you want to do? How can I help? Or what I get in the way? All that stuff. Have those conversations. And then we get to the point 6 months in, have not given the first expectation formally, but do you think their behaviors have changed with me being there? Yeah. You think we're training more than we were? Yeah. One of my expectations was we will train an hour every day we work. But you work at enough busy companies, you betray that because you can't. It's 10 o'clock at night and the guys are looking at me and they're like, hey, we haven't had a formal hour of training. Are we going out? Are we doing it? Like, no, it's 10 o'clock at night. Like maybe when I was younger, we would have done it, but no. But we did hang out after that EMS call and talk for 15 minutes about how the stairwell exits in this particular building to the outside instead of the lobby. We did talk about the panel on that one call, on that fire alarm we had for 10 minutes. And so you got your hour, you got your hour in there. Or we talked about it in a conversation, and so it's like, if you're not going to honor it all the time, and you can't expect people to honor it, including yourself, all the time, why give it in the first place? Why paint yourself in that corner, which is what I don't want to do. So without stating we're going to train an hour on the day, did the unassuming belief, the group norm, become, hey, after calls, Ben likes to talk and walk the buildings and get to know that, what stairwell goes to the what roof and what layouts are, and like, you can plan on not just going back to the station. Yeah, that got communicated pretty quickly across all 3 shifts. Ben likes to be busy. Doesn't like busy work, but he likes to be busy. So if you bring him something, he's gonna find a way to do it, if that's what you want to do. So bring him something. He's not going to just say yeah and then not do it. So they're changing their behaviors around me as a result of what I'm doing. So it really becomes, it's not what you're saying, it's more what you're modeling and what you're doing. People pay way more attention to your actions than they do your words, your deeds, so to speak. So after about 6 months, I get to the point where I feel pretty comfortable with the bearings I've got across all 3 shifts, but as well as where they fall into each battalion on all 3 shifts, as well as where the mission for the boat is falling into with the politics of the external stakeholders of the organization. I've got my sea legs underneath me, so to speak. And now it's time. Like, now it's time to try to change some of the things that have not been working for them. And maybe some of these things have contributed to why leaders came and left, because they didn't feel they were doing a good job and they weren't interested in it. But they were definitely things that were not working for them, that were negatively affecting our ability to deliver our mission, as well as these people's careers. Like, there were not a lot of promotions out of that entire station, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something I definitely am curious about why are people not interested in taking a bigger bite of these leadership roles in this organization? Because in my mind, they are going above and beyond most of their roles, because they're not just firefighters. They have this whole other skill set that they've got to maintain, which is a lot. And they did a really good job with that kind of stuff. So I asked the lieutenants, I was like, hey, my bearing on this is I'd like to bring us together and do our own little stakeholder workshop. So that'd be 3 of you. And then I'd ask each of you to pick a person or 2, and I'd get overtime approved. And we're going to get together in a room, and we're going to look at this mission doctrine, and we're going to look at what we do here. And we are going to come up with what we expect from each other and how we're going to deliver it. And then we're going to hold each other accountable. And so that was obviously met with some skepticism of like, I don't know, but if that's what you want to do, that's fine. And I think the reason they indulged it was because I'd been focusing on what was going right for the last 6 months, instead of just beating them over the head with lots of stuff. Now, things were not perfect, right? Like, there were plenty of times where I had to say, hey guys, we're not going to do this. Or, hey guys, have you thought about doing this? But I found that I was surrendering a lot of what I wanted to see change right away in the short term to try to get with them long term. Because I had told them, like, I'd like to be here 3 or 4 years before I look at moving, or longer, but that's my initial time frame that I'd like to do it. So we come together. I'm able to get more on-duty people. And if you've ever done a strategic planning session, I started with the presentation of my bearings. Like, hey, in the last 6 months, here's what I have seen. You guys don't feel like the administration values what you do. You don't feel like your battalion chiefs independently support you. I see more evidence of that on this particular shift than others. You guys are concerned that Lenny's going to retire here in the next year, and you're worried about who might replace him. And I just went through maybe 15 things, and I looked for their body language, and I looked for them to be nodding, and I asked if I missed anything. And by the end of it, I was pretty spot on. I mean, I probably had a beat about 95% of that stuff. And I don't think I would have had that much information to help me make decisions if I had gone in and just focused on reinforcing what I thought I knew already. And I don't think they would have been as well received. And I don't think I would have had the private conversations with them where they would have been as forthcoming about their disappointments and the things that they didn't like that were going on, because they actually thought I cared, whereas so many times their leadership had made them feel like they didn't matter to them. And everybody wants to feel significant in their lives. I mean, we all strive for that. And I hated the fact that they hadn't felt any of that. And I could identify with so much of that. There's been plenty of times in my career where I didn't feel like what I was doing mattered, or that I was even a significant player. And some days I feel like that. I still go back to that, pity party of like, I don't know if what I'm doing matters and all that stuff. So I have as many doubts as I do confidences on things. I'm always growing. And that's what I love about you, with your rethinking things about, is it useful and what does it mean and what's the interpretation of it, and how does it help the group? How does it help me? How does it help the organization? You just think about it across so many things, across so many levels. And that's what we need to be doing. Understanding why the tools are in our toolboxes, to use that cliche that I think I hear it used a lot, and not just going to the same tool every time, because that's what, the guy that taught us did. Yeah. So going back to that conversation after that initial presentation, it then became, all right, so now what do you guys want to do about these things? Let's look at the strengths of our teams, like each shift, each person here, and then let's talk about our weaknesses, and let's talk about the things around us that we can control and the things that we cannot control. Those were the kind of things that were like our threats. And then, hey, if we really wanted to promote our brand here and increase this place to be a premier for being both a firefighter and being on the Marine response team, what does that look like for you? What behaviors do you want to see reinforced? And so 8 hours, they worked in small groups where we changed up stuff, and they had conversations, and some of them were uncomfortable, but they were having them more with their peers than they were with me, which was really interesting, right? And that's perfect because they're the subject matter experts. Like, I'm not gonna be able to get in the weeds, tell them about, why the boat should be positioned here and not this way, or the equipment on that should be stored in a certain place or not. But every once in a while, they would look to me as kind of like the tiebreaker of like, hey, what do you see? What do you think? And so I paid more attention to just kind of the group dynamics than anything, and just tried to make sure that we were focusing on what was going right, what was in our breadbasket, so to speak. And then at the end of the day, I went over quickly what I had kind of gleaned, because I was taking notes of everything, and I ended up producing, I think it was probably a 2 or 3 page document, kind of summarizing that stuff for people that were not there. And I told them, like, hey, this is our living document now. Like, you guys have had input into this. This reflects you as much as it does me. And if you don't believe that, now's the time to tell me, because tomorrow morning, this is what I expect from you all. Like, this is what I'm going to enforce. And if your behavior of your crews doesn't match this, I'm going to start calling you guys out on this, because you have told me that this is what you value. Again, if you disagree, now it's time to tell me. And that's exactly what they did. And it was amazing to watch all 3 shifts like rise with this document, because so much of it was already what they were doing and doing well. And so the things to tweak, so to speak, the things that were outside of the breadbasket that I needed them to fix, they were able to consciously focus on those things, but they didn't have to worry about the 2 or 3 pages of expectations going back to that first story that the lieutenant himself couldn't even remember, that they didn't even know they needed to be doing, whether they were already doing it. Like, they were just able to focus on one thing. And so with that experience and the rookies experience and just conversations, what I've gotten into that is the one for me, one for you, and one for my boss. So what I do quarterly, or as needed if it's sooner, because some people chew through this fast if they're motivated, and some people take longer, they will take that full quarter, is focusing on like how you would align your tires on your car, because they all are going to have different travel and different wear, but you still need them at the end of the day pointing and having the same experience as you travel the road. So I do that with people. So meeting with each person and figuring out, where they are on the last goal that we set, and then talking about collectively what the team goal is, and just kind of giving them awareness or certainty on how their performance is tying to the overall performance of the group, to the overall performance of the mission. And so as I move up, right, I focus on different levels. So when I was a lieutenant, obviously, it was, here's what my captain wants me to do, here's what I need us to do, and here's what I need you to do. And that I need you to do would be as reflective of things they had told me as it was things that I thought or had observed or other people had told me. So to give you an example with this one, went to the battalion chief of one of the shifts and said, hey, what do you need that group to be doing over the next 90 days? Give me one thing you want them to focus on. And he said, turnout times. They're slow to the truck. He's like, I have a real big problem with them being slow to the truck. And I was like, okay. And my big thing is, if you give somebody an expectation, you got to let them know what it is that's the metric for achieving that. And that's an easy one, because we get a report by email that shows your turnout times. They capture that. So no big deal. So then I go to the lieutenant and I'm like, hey, next 90 days, what's one thing that you would really like to focus on? I'd really like to get released as an acting, EMS supervisor. Okay. What's standing in the way of that? Like, give me the context of that, because this isn't the first time he's asking about it. Oh, well, this and this and this. Okay. All right. I need you to meet with your people, and I need a goal from each of those people. in a couple of days. And then he would meet with them, and I'd come back and I'd be like, okay, what's most important for firefighter X in the next 90 days? Well, he's got to get off probation. Okay. What's most important for firefighter Y in the next 90 days? Well, he's looking for an opportunity to be on the driver committee. Like, he's been trying for the last 6 months and nobody's taking him seriously. So if you could help with that, that would be great. All right. What's the next one with firefighter, Bravo, and so on and so on. And then you look for the opportunities where supporting one of the firefighters would overlap with another one. So the classic one was, well, such and such says they want to ride up front of the truck more often, or the engine more often. They want more leadership experience. And you're like, okay, great. And then you have another one who's going through probation and has all these checkoff things you need to do. And you're like, all right, you want leadership experience? Here you go. And so you compare those two together and say, hey, these are two related goals for the next 90 days. Here's what's yours to do, and here's what's yours to do. And then bringing them all together and being like, hey guys, like, so now I've got 5 firefighters sitting at the table, the lieutenant and myself. I'm like, so over the next 90 days, here is what we're going to focus on for our shift. This is the goal of our battalion chief. You guys got to work on your turnout times. So please know that I'm going to be focusing on these things, and I'm going to be calling you out on it. No hard feelings. If you're not getting the truck fast enough, then I'm going to let you know. You're going to get the same email I get every morning, and I'm going to highlight when we're not getting to it. And I can even tell you what call we didn't get to it on. Any questions? Nope. So they know, like, that's what I'm looking for one time. All right. So here's one for me. I would really like to focus on inventorying the boat equipment. I've been asked by my boss to provide this, but he's given me more time, but I feel like there's more urgency to this. So that's what I want to focus on. So if there's a downtime, I'm going to focus on this with you all. So you guys can plan on that ahead of time. And then you'd be amazed the number of times people are like, oh, I've got a list of inventory. You're like, where was that? Where's that been the whole time? Like, well, you didn't ask. I didn't know it was important to you. Like, it's like, oh, okay. So sometimes the goals, you get them done really, really quickly. The turnout time one, it's going to take the 90 days to build the behaviors to fix that. If they get it the first day, you don't just go, oh yeah, done. Because you need to see it consistently done. But the inventory is different. When the inventory is done, it's done. And then if you got that done in 30 days, what are you doing for the next 60? Do you not have goals? Like, of course. So I would have something else like, hey guys, we chewed through that. So this is the next thing I'd like to focus on. Now, if you said it's going to take you 90 days to do it and you get done on the 86th day, write it out 4 days. It's not like you have to constantly have busy work, but you also don't want to have an extended period of time where there's downtime. You want to have busy hands instead of idle ones, because that's when the complaints come. So at the end of 90 days, and I'm working in the background to check with the lieutenant to make sure that he's engaging each firefighter, you've got a tremendous amount of accomplishment. But really at the end of the day, it was only really one thing for each person, but they were able to see how their one thing overlapped with the greater purpose. And so now the battalion chief's happy, I'm happy, they're feeling good because they're winning, they're swinging and hitting at pitches they recognize and making contact with the ball. Can I leverage that over the next 90 days for something bigger or smaller? So sometimes you don't start with the biggest, most impressing needs. Sometimes you try to build in some smaller wins. But you'd be amazed if you go back over your day and pay attention to what you focus on and how much of it's negative. They're not doing this, and then think about positive, but they are doing this, and you really focus and accentuate on that positive stuff. I think that's really what's going to help people. So yeah, to summarize all of that, right? Here's some good use of expectations. Have it in mind that you're trying to create certainty about what the group expects from them. And so if you're new to the group, you don't know what that is yet. So you need to get your bearings, have conversations, demonstrate humility. And then within about 90 days, have a goal of being able to articulate to anyone that asked what's most important to your team right now, goal-wise, and what's their business card, so to speak. How do they conduct themselves? And if you can articulate on their behalf what that looks like, and they agree with you, then that's good enough. And then use that to reinforce the day-to-day. If you've got a good team, they're probably not going to make you do it much. But every once in a while, I'll be like, hey, I thought we agreed that we were going to throw wheel chocks down. Yep, my bad. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Fix it. And then move on. Once you've been there a while, use those to onboard, new people. Like, hey, this is our flavor of the fire department here. Because every station, every shift has got its own little culture. Here's ours. Here's how I think you can come in and be really, really successful. Or at a minimum, here's what you could do to not be successful. Now, what do you want to add to this? Because the culture is going to change a little bit once you have a new player. Maybe a little bit if they're solid. Maybe a lot if they're solid. Maybe a little bit if they're not. And maybe if they suck, it'll reinforce what you've already got going on, and they won't be there but for so long. And then every time you come into a new place, I would consider doing the same. But what you don't want to do is, like, I was handed a page of 3 pages of expectations by a battalion chief one time when I was a captain. And it was stuff like, I expect you to check your email 3 times a day. And it's like, okay, so I'll check it at 7:30, 7:45, and 8 a.m. Did I meet your expectation? Clearly not. That's not what he intended to do, but that's how he chose to articulate stuff. And it was impossible. It was an impossible list of stuff. It was overwhelming. And so I didn't even try. And that's really what we want to avoid, is shutting people down. And we want them to feel like stuff is useful. And so there's so many more moments where by celebrating what's going right and reinforcing what you want to see, you're really setting the expectations of the group or reinforcing them. But to come in and have no bearing about it, and then try to tell people what to do, and at best they're already doing it, and that feels like you're being condescending, if I'm being honest. At worst, they're not doing it at all, but you're not giving them anything in a way that they're able to actually succeed. But I don't know a lot of teams, even the bad ones, that were just absolute disasters. There was usually something that was going right. And so it's like, just focus on what that piece is. So I don't want to discourage people from writing expectations, to writing them down. I think forcing yourself to write is a good thing. I think it forces you to clarify what you're thinking. And I know that, the part of the brain that processes language is different when you say it out loud versus when you think it. And if you've ever said, I don't know why I said that, that sounded better in my head, that's what that is. And so you need to be able to talk about it. You need to be able to read it. You need to be able to write it. You need to be able to chisel down and have these things have the most impact for people. And that's not to say that you can't write them down and give them to people. But if you're going to do that, I would suggest that you know what they are. Like, after 6 months of getting bearings and then putting that 3-page document together, I could talk through that pretty well. Still didn't have it all memorized, but the overarching themes of it, if somebody did something, I would know enough automatically that it fell in or fell out of what the expectation for the overall bearing of that particular thing was. And that's really what I'm looking for. Is I need people to be able to stop themselves because they recognize they're getting ready to step on the sideline. But I don't have any interest in chasing 22 players around that football field at every given moment, trying to figure out, I'm going to miss stuff. I just can't. I need them to be able to police themselves. And that's where that peer stuff comes in. So I'm going to shut up now because I've been talking for a while. What you got?
Man, there's a lot. Just so many things. I'm just kind of sitting here writing some things out so I don't forget kind of some points. And I honestly don't know where. I guess where I should start is kind of just a little bit of my story as an officer. I've been a company officer, I think, for 5 years now, maybe 6. But one of the first, the first station I was at, I was only there for 6 months, and then I got shipped out. And then I've been at that station the rest of the time. So I feel like almost that first one didn't even count, because it was just, I didn't know what I was doing. It was too short, whatever. But so my current situation, it started out as coming into an environment that needed a lot of changes, and I've talked about this quite a bit through episodes and stuff. The culture was broken at the station I was headed to. And so for me, that even kind of cemented more the fact that I needed these expectations to put out. And looking back on it, just trying to kind of figure out how I could do that differently, in the ways that you're talking about. And it goes back for me, I think, to culture. I think in our conversation that we had about mission and vision with Sergi and Alone, kind of the epiphany that I had in that conversation was the word purpose. That kind of just punched me in the face as we're talking about it. I don't even care anymore about mission or vision mostly. I want to focus on purpose. What is my purpose? What is our purpose? And so for today, kind of the same thing is happening with me with this conversation, but the word is culture. And, it's obviously a word that I love. It's part of everything I do, but I don't really know that I care anymore about expectations. I just want to focus on this is the culture that we have created. I don't need to write down or to tell you that I expect you to wear vest on accidents or bunk out on alarms. That's what we do. That's the culture we've created. And somebody new coming into our crew is going to see that very quickly because they're going to see their officer, they're going to see their firefighters around them doing it. So if that's not enough to clue them in to say, I should probably do this too, then there's a conversation that needs to be had later. But otherwise, that's going to be something that corrects itself very quickly, kind of like you've pointed out several times, is just the self-correcting or self-policing, whatever you want to call it. That's one of the coolest things about culture to me. And that's one of the, we're starting to see it now, after 4 or 5 years of working through this process of basically starting at nothing, rebuilding, me not knowing how to rebuild a culture and just trying to figure it out as we go, and the losses and the wins through that process. One of the coolest things that I can say has happened recently in the recent past is that I'm starting to see that aspect of us as a crew. I'm starting to see my members, my team members fix those things on their own without me having to say anything. Going out and reloading a hose, a pre-connect because it looks like trash. It used to be like I had to be involved in that. I had to say, hey, let's go do this because they look like junk. I don't have to anymore. That's just what they do. And probably the old me would have that in writing somewhere, and it might be in, I don't know. But actually, now that I said it, I think it is some of the expectation stuff. But that's kind of exciting to me that it almost makes me more free as an officer because I don't have to have the strings tied to all these things. It's just, okay, I'll sit down with a new person on the crew now, and I'll just talk about a purpose. This is the purpose that we serve here. And, maybe give a little bit of a story of the history of the culture of this crew. And we're going to figure things out, follow so-and-so. This guy is solid in these areas. If you have any questions in these areas, go to him. If you are wanting, to learn more about this is your guy, whatever. I feel, I don't know, I'm almost excited to get back to work and almost basically tear up the expectations and kind of start over, and not really even start over, but just kind of sit down with everybody and say, have this conversation with them. Because like you've touched on several times, most of those things that I have in there, I don't have to say them for them to be done, and if there are one or two things in there that is, then I'm either already addressing it to try to change that, or it doesn't matter because I don't even notice, you know what I mean? And so kind of that's always been my mindset is, and it's almost been a conflict in my head for a while, that I've heard a lot of people say, don't go in firing your guns, don't go in changing everything right away. But for me, especially for the one situation that I've had, I felt like I had to, because I had to let them know how we were going to do it. But did I really? Yeah. And do I really need to, if I'm placed in that situation again? I don't think you necessarily do. And so that's kind of been cool for me to sit and think through as you're going through this. Something else is, you talked about the focusing on the positive over the negative, and I know you could speak to this much more just because of the interest you have in the the brain and the human just nature and all that. But I've heard a lot about what you were discussing as well, and it is so interesting to to really hear you and other people that really know what they're talking about talk about the power of positivity. And in the realm of, don't tell your kid to not do this. Tell your kid to do this. You know what I mean? It's not that you're addressing it differently, or it's not that you're not addressing it. You're just addressing it differently. You're telling them to do this so that their mind hears that. It's almost like, and I don't know what the truth is to this. I'm sure you could go into it more, but I've heard it said that your mind really doesn't process the word, don't or not. It just hears. So if, like, going to your story and the coach says, don't swing if it's out of the strike zone. Well, your mind is really saying swing it out of the strike zone. You're trying to focus on that main part of it. And one thing, just a kind of a personal story for that, is my daughter plays softball, and one of my irritations with their coach is almost every time one of their hitters had 2 strikes, he would say, run to first on the 3rd strike. Before they even threw it, it's like, don't tell them to run to first on the 3rd strike when you only have 2 strikes. I mean, and you hear that every single time. It's almost like your mind is just saying, all right, just do whatever it takes to get to that 3rd strike so I can run, because that's what he told me to do. You know what I mean? And so anyway, several of kind of those things were running through my mind as you were talking. And do you have any kind of more insight in that negative, positive type? Am I kind of on the same track? I know I'm just spitballing, but.
Yeah, no, I think you are. And using your story as an example of that, like, we can tell people, this is what I expect you to do. Like, for me, it would be like, I expect you to go down swinging. That would be my, probably, if I was going to be coach baseball, softball, that's what I would tell people. Like, I don't care if you miss, but what we're not going to do is sit up there and watch 3 pitches and then, get struck out. So I can tell them, I want you to swing. I want you to be aggressive, and I will support you even if you don't get on base. And that's the expectation. But then the first time they do that, I yell at them when they come over to the sideline. Why'd you swing at that? And then they go up and do it again. Why'd you swing at that? At some point, they stop doing what they're doing to perform or excel, and they start doing it to survive. And socially, what we do a lot of times is we try to survive the situation. It's not a physical threat. It's just a social threat. It's not worth doing this or not doing this because I don't want to hear about it from such and such, or I don't want their reaction, or I don't want this and that. So we really do ourselves a disservice when we're trying to accentuate the positive and things we should be doing, but then we react to them negatively, because then people try to just do whatever it is, the bare minimum amount that to get out of the situation instead of focusing on it. And we see this in stuff like motivation too. Like, you want to screw up someone who's inherently motivated, like, extrinsically incentivize them. Take something that you love doing for free and will spend all the time in the world. And then I'll come along and look, like, let's make it specific, right? So let's say that, like, you did coaching for this. Like, this was a coaching session that you were giving me and letting me ask you questions, and you did it for free because you just loved doing it. And then I came along and I was like, hey, Jeremy, I found so much value in this that I want to pay you for this. And you're like, no, that's not necessary. And you're like, no, I'm serious. It's worth it. I want to give you $3 every time we get together for an hour and a half and talk. And you're like, $3? Like, all of a sudden that external measure conflicts with your internal measure of like my time is worth more than $3. Like, and then you're like, well, okay, no, don't worry about it. You just keep your $3. I'll do it for free. But the next time we get together, you're going to remember, $3? Like, is that really what he thought this was worth? And I didn't mean to offend you. And we do that all the time, is we tell people what we think they're worth in their performance. And they're like, really? Is that all I'm worth? And classically, we do this with our incumbents. Oh my gosh. Like, our 15, 20, 25 year men and women, like, how do they leave at the end of their careers? We spent all this time investing in them, giving them all these skills. And then by the end of their career, we've marginalized most of them put them at the slowest stations, whether they want to be there or not, or move them to assignments they don't want and they get tired of it because they don't want to do what's required of them in this new position. They don't want to learn new habits. So they leave. And it's like, I hate the fact that you left like that. But that's exactly what we did. We as an organization or as a leadership did something to them that made them second guess what their internal measure of themselves was. And that goes back to the significance thing. People will do great things and give you their best when they feel that the work they're doing is significant. So there's your purpose. You're doing this for them, the citizens, every day. And I think it's the CEO of Virgin that says this. Richard Branson? Like,
yeah.
I think he says this, or maybe it's Mark Cuban. I like both of their styles because they're eclectic and they've got different mixes in there. Like, my job as a leader is not to focus on I think they say the consumer. Like, my job is to focus on the employees so that they can focus on the consumer. And it might seem kind of like a contradiction, but that's exactly how I approach it. Like, my job is to inconvenience myself at work to help other leaders that fall within my battalion so that they can inconvenience themselves and help their members so that their members can inconvenience themselves and help the citizens. And it has to be modeled that way. I cannot sit on the high and not take a bite of the shit sandwich and expect them to do the same with the same amount of fervor and excitement that, it says we should. And so the purpose is always them. It's always the citizens, and it just flows down and out, and the citizens are technically, I guess, the end user, whatever product we have. And so that's what we design stuff in mind. And if we're asking the culture to change, it needs to be with the purpose that it enhances our ability to serve those citizens, and that doesn't mean that you can't be selfish. Like, I got to stress that enough. It doesn't mean that you can't do something for your workforce that feels selfish, because in the long run, it better prepares them for their mission. Like, an example would be, it's okay to issue a bond to build a bigger, better station that gives people an enhanced quality of life while they're at work and gives them better apparatus to do the mission and better equipment and better training. You can ask the citizens to spend more money if it supports the overall mission, that it will be returned to them in a better product of services. And so, like I say, like, we shouldn't do everything with the citizens, I guess, best interest in mind, but we should do it with them in mind. So a citizen probably would be like, well, I don't want to pay more taxes for that fire station, because they don't know the purpose. They don't know the utility. They don't understand what it is that they're getting in return. So I don't need to bend the knee to every instance of what they want, as long as I'm designing this fire service and creating culture that delivers what they need, whether they know it or not. And ideally, I'm taking the time to try to eliminate the gap between those two things. Because if you run a fire service where the citizens don't see anything that they think they want or need, then you're not going to get the funding and support that you need to do that. So yeah, just focus on the positive. And again, it's not to say that you can't give people expectations, but I think what they want more so is they want your time. They want to be able to ask you questions and get to know you, get your bearings. They'll know whether you support something or whether it's going to upset you. And whether you say it or not, eventually, if they do it in front of you, you'll tell them, whether it's through words or whether it's through your body language. We communicate much more with that kind of stuff than we ever do with words. So if you're going to put it on paper, then just know that anything you put on paper and you give them as an expectation, you have got to be able to measure. So if you have 5 expectations and you have 5 people, you've got to be able to measure 25 different inputs and whatever else you're being asked to do by the organization, by your boss, by the citizens, and things that come up. And so just set yourself up for success by not expecting too much. It's nice, like, if you've ever expected very little and been pleasantly surprised, it feels surprisingly good. And a lot of times it gets the ego out of stuff, and people feel like they contribute, and they're more likely to contribute, because whatever the entry is into this really cool team that you've built, it isn't this super high, hard thing to do. It's just quite simply love the job. Yeah. Like, you guys love the job. I love the job. Okay, cool. And now we can start doing stuff together. But when they think the effort to begin is too much, then they won't, or they'll do the bare minimum and they'll fight you. And we do a lot to create that, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. I've definitely asked for too much for people for probably the better part of my career, but I try not to ask no more from them than I do for myself. And so that's how I've justified it. Like, I'll never ask you to do something I won't or haven't done myself. That's a cliche, right? Now, the problem with that is it has very real negative consequences for me. Like, I've asked a lot of myself, and my family has paid the consequence of that. Not the fire department, like my family, my health. I used to have beautiful hair, Jeremy, like bangs. Like, I mean, I used to have less body fat. You know, I used to not be on hypertension medications. Like, and if I love myself, and I should love myself, and I'm willing to do that to myself, am I doing the same to my people? And the answer is yeah, probably. Like, if they go home and they're unhappy and they're taking work stuff home because I'm a crappy leader, or I'm not maximizing what they're really good at, and because I don't care, because I haven't even asked them, and I've just given them this blanket list of expectations, whether it matters or not, then that's a missed opportunity of leadership. And it's very unfortunate. And I think you're going to continue to see more and more of that written about leadership, is this idea of subjective well-being. Is how do I feel when I'm at work? I want to feel good, right? Like, when I feel good, I'll feel motivated. When I feel motivated, I'll do things, I'll be successful, which will reinforce feeling good. But if you've ever been around somebody that like nothing's good enough, it doesn't feel good at all. And that's what you don't want to create with those lists of expectations. But to go back to what you're talking about, like focusing on the culture piece is super important. When you're winning, when you're the dominant culture, like your influence has exerted as much as it's going to on that, then I'm more apt to use expectations. But really what I'm doing is just, again, trying to create certainty for people as they come and go from the team. Letting them know where they stand, their significance, so to speak, trying to match their internal worth, what I see it is. Because a lot of times people will downplay that, especially your good ones. They won't take as much credit, and you got to push it to them. Like, no, you did a great job. You deserve this credit. Take this. And ironically enough, the people that are crappy at their jobs typically take too much credit. And it's like, no, that's not. And you don't have to be rude about it, but again, aligning tires in the car. Like, I need everyone to know how fast they're spinning and how hard they're working and what that means to the overall travel of our team down the road. And if somebody's not spinning the way they need to be, or they're drifting outside of what everybody else is pointing at, then I got to have a conversation that realigns that tire and understands. And at the same time, I got to understand what the role of those tires are. Like, the front two tires steer, or they don't, or all four tires steer, or they don't. Or some situations, I want all four steering, or they don't. And I just need to understand that those roles change based on what I'm expecting of them and what the calls are. And so everything's complicated. That's reality. And if you spend any time thinking about it, then you're already ahead of the game than just blanketly accepting something as true. Because whatever we're doing as leaders, really all we're talking about is a strategy in response to a need. And your needs are very different than my needs. And my team's needs are very different than yours. My organization's needs are different. My citizens' needs are likely different. And so you can't just take a blanket tool, a one-size-fits-all wrench. It's worth having different attachments, and different purposes and different styles of wrenches for different things based on where you are. And so we need to try to change out some of the tools in the toolbox and add some of those tools there as well. So I love this topic, and I love that crew first mindset of focusing on the culture. The thing I can add, if we have time, is a lot of times we highlight culture in a negative way, where we're talking about, I can't get the change that we need to get because the culture is fighting it. And again, if you think about what that culture is, like, those are the things that we do when we win. So if they're fighting you, it's because they don't see why this helps them win, either easier or, better, or whatever it is. They don't see the utility behind it. So there's your first obstacle. Like, is it truly better? Do we truly need to be doing this? Or is this just a want disguised as a need? And if it is, then you've got to take some time to explain it to them, to sell it to them, to let them process how this specific change might affect what they've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. And it's not just one thing, right? Like, it's never just, if all we do is tweak this, then we'll have what we need. There's usually some other things that also get overlapped with that too. And it changes based on who's with you. Like, culture changes by the hour sometimes, even with the same people. It just plays out differently. And if you've ever come to work as a leader and then somebody marks off sick and you're like, yes, then you have what's called counterculture, right? You have people working against what the norms are. And unfortunately, a lot of times, if a team is set that the C performance is what they're going to deliver, and a leader comes in and is like, nope, I want a B plus at a minimum, then they're creating problems in the minds of their team. and they don't see the need for that. And you might not get them to be a B plus, and you got to be okay with that. But if you want to know if you're influencing culture, if things stay the same after you leave, then you've influenced the culture. If they revert back to what they were doing, then all they were doing was playing man-to-man defense. They were just playing you. And that was just a strategy to survive, not to perform. And so that's the thing, is not losing our heads about it, because it can take years to change culture. And the larger the organization, the longer it takes. Like when we talk about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 5 to 10 years to change the culture. And when we drift out of that as leadership, the response usually is visceral. It's like, what the hell are you doing? So obviously, if you get that reaction, you need to pay attention, because you might have violated yourself what the culture of that is. But the beauty of it is because it's norms, because it's what they normally do, and it's kind of guiding assumptions, and whether it does incorporate the policies as much as it incorporates the informal rules of the game that exist there, then that can give you some stability. So you might think the culture is what's in your way to change, but in reality, what it's doing is it's allowing them to focus on the ideally one or two things you're asking them to change without threatening the rest of their world. Because if everything is a problem and nothing is going well, then people are not going to be able to orient themselves to what's most important right now. But if they can trust that 95% of what they're doing is right, then they'll just focus on the 5% that they need to change. And so really it's about using and leveraging the culture to enact the change. We have thermal imaging cameras. We have gear that's designed to go further, hotter than ever before. I'm not aware of any horse-drawn pumpers that people are using to lay in and pump a fire scene anymore. There's lots of technology we've incorporated. My God, the amount of change that we have taken in American Fire Service last year, 100 years, is amazing. So don't tell me we don't like change. You can't just blanketly say we don't like it.
Yeah.
What we don't like is change for change's sake. What we don't like is change where we don't understand the utility of it. So if I could impress upon people anything, it's about, you need to go back and look at these expectations, and you need to see it as A, are they positive? Are they focused on the positive? B, are they redundant? If they're redundant, then replace them. If they're already doing it, then no need. Or if you're going to keep them as a future reference for how to onboard somebody new into the team, then that's fine too. But just understand that that's what it is. And then make sure that you can attend and measure what it is that you're asking them to do, because people, when they start doing it, are going to look for feedback from you. And if you can't give them any specific feedback about, yes, this is helping, or no, it's not helping, and why, you lack the utility that they're going to look for, and they're going to revert back to old habits, because those, as far as they knew, worked. And so if somebody asks you why, they're asking you to clarify the significance of something. You're asking them to update their programming for all their routines and habits. And the worst thing you could do is say, you don't need to know that. Or, I'm the boss, just do what I say. Like, that's the worst thing you could do, because it doesn't make you feel significant. It doesn't demonstrate the utility of stuff. And that's why you get stuff like start with why, like Simon Sinek. People can orient their behaviors to stuff better when they understand what is expected of them and what are the consequences of not doing that. And by consequences, I mean, like, how useful is this? Does it help or hurt? As much as I mean, you're going to get a write-up versus talking to versus nothing at all. And I'll just do it. But the second you stop attending to what it is you're expecting of them is the second that behavior is going to revert back to whatever the lowest level permissible is. But when they see the utility in it, they'll hold it there for you when you're not looking. And you're going to be very distracted as a leader, especially in today's fire service, because there's just so much stuff you got to focus on. So anyway, a very sexy topic nonetheless.
To go along with that, just to bring up another kind of word, or I guess two words that are very important to leadership and anybody that is trying to lead somebody, is buy-in. And how can you expect to gain buy-in if you're the one putting the expectations out? If this is me, this is what I want, nothing else. I get no feedback from anybody. This is just what I expect from you. How much buy-in are you going to get from that, as opposed to the scenario that you gave of just sitting back, watching how things go, giving it some time, getting feedback from everybody else, sitting and asking them what they expect of me as your leader, and what they expect of us as a crew. And now you have this, this whole big picture that they own a piece of. They're obviously going to buy in to that so much more because they own some of it already. And that's huge. Buy-in is you can't change culture for the good if you can't get buy-in. And that is something that I've learned, and it's hard to do sometimes. If you're doing something to make some changes, yeah, like you said, hopefully I'm given a why and all that. Hopefully there are reasons for making these changes. But even that, even if I'm giving reasons and it's not something they're particularly interested in, it's still going to be hard to get that buy-in quickly. It takes a while. And so I think that for me is just another thing that kind of ties this all together and really cements the fact that it needs to be different. The process needs to be different as far as how I've viewed it in the past. And so that's kind of just something else, another piece of it.
And because, I mean, leadership's hard. It's really hard, I think, if you're doing it right, even if you're doing it well, I think it can be hard because people will just present with messy problems, and sometimes they're work related and sometimes they're home related or sometimes they're both. And I mean, every time you think you've got it on cruise control, something pops up and you've got to get back to actively doing something. And the second that you stay on cruise control too long is somebody could get hurt or die. Like it could be very serious. And it's not always serious, but a lot of times it is. And so like when you look at people's buy-in, I think really what it is it's a reflection of what they believe, and when you look at expectations and it's like, are these you? Like, as I read these, do you see yourself in this? Like, is this what you believe? Do you agree with this belief? And I think the reason that matters is because all of your actions and all of your words are driven by your core beliefs. And there's been lots of times where people have said, hey, I'm sorry I said that. I won't say that in the future. And my response has been, don't promise me that. Because if you haven't changed your beliefs or our conversation, you're going to do it again. Or I won't do that behavior again. It's like, well, why? And so I'll use the why in reverse of like, why would you do that again? Or why wouldn't you do that again? Like, I've got to get to that core operating system of beliefs because, in the moment when they have to react to something, that's what's driving all of their stuff unconsciously is the beliefs. And the number one belief is going to be protect yourself. It's going to be serve yourself. It's very selfish, like it's a survival mode. So I've got to replace that core operating system with a we theme of like, we can do this. We will fix this. And it takes time to do that. And some people get it more natural than others. And there's certainly, how we grew up and the family system that's in place there, like all of these things influence who we become as adults. And so sometimes there's a lot of unpacking to do. And sometimes people aren't meant for the fire service, and that's okay too. They're just never going to be able to operate their core value system and their belief system that way. But, going back to that assignment that I talked with you about where I was the captain of the Marine response team, I can't overemphasize enough how much feelings and emotions matter. And that goes back into the beliefs things too. A lot of the reasons that we believe things are because they have been shown to us through experiences to matter. And usually the things that matter are the things that help us feel good and help us avoid not feeling good. And so a lot of times we will do things not necessarily even being able to articulate it, but really what we're pursuing is pleasure. It is very hedonist that way. Like we want pleasure. We don't want threats. We don't want punishment. We just want to focus on pleasure piece. So while I was at this assignment, we had I'd been there over a year now. We had done the 6-month thing. We were making progress. We were seeing wins. And we caught a cardiac arrest call. And so I'm on the engine suppression piece. I've got someone that's working, I believe it was overtime, riding backwards. And then I have someone that's normally assigned to this shift, driving the engine. And we're going to this cardiac arrest call, which in my area means you're going to get an EMS supervisor, 2 suppression pieces, could be a ladder truck, could be a rescue, could be an engine, but it's going to have 3 people on it. And then you're going to get 1 ambulance or a fire medic. So it'll have an ALS provider, at least, could have 2, but most likely 1, and a BLS driver. So cardiac arrest is going to get 9 people coming out the gate, which is a fair amount, especially if you're a volunteer and you're used to having just 2 or 3. So we're on the correct operating tack, and apparently a unit was closer, so they on a different tack say you can cancel, and I don't hear it. And so I show up on scene, and like not to just they add themselves, but another unit add themselves. So there's like 4 suppression pieces there. I walk in the room just to see if they need anything. And there's like 12, 13, 14 people in this living room. I was like, good God. All right. So I was like, hey, we're here, but we're leaving. Right. Because somebody's got to be in service. And before I can get out the door, they're like, hey, can we have your suction unit? Because for whatever reason, the portable suction unit that they have is not working. And I don't know if they've got theirs on their units, but whatever. I'm there. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Hey, run out and grab the suction unit. So it comes back. And in the time it took them to get the suction unit, I'm standing outside, and the daughter of the patient walks up, and she is freaking out. I mean, not doing well. I mean, her mother's young. She's very upset, doesn't understand what's going on. And so I start talking with her, trying to tell her about what's going on, and not over promising anything, but not trying to scare her at the same time. And then I realized, I'm going to get in service, but I'm going to stay here because somebody needs to be, talking to her, because previously everybody was just walking in and out of the house. Nobody was paying any attention to her. I felt like that mattered. And so I did, and we ended up getting a pulse back. And so now they're going to transport. And of all those people, only one other person was an ALS provider besides the paramedic on the ambulance, which I had not really considered. But as soon as he got this pulse back, now all this other stuff's got to get done. And he's like, man, I'd really like to have that extra ALS provider. Hey, Ben, can I borrow one of your people? I'm like, well, they're both ALS providers. Take them both. Like, I'll meet you at the hospital. And so they go off, and now I get to do what I never get to do, which is drive an engine. And I'm super excited. So and all these habits, I haven't driven an engine in years. So all these habits, all these norms come back. I drive up to the hospital, I get out, and I set my wheel chock. And I set it in front of the rear tire. And as I come up, I notice a very distinctive series of lights on my pump panel. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, what does that mean? No, I don't have any water in my tank. Is that what that? Oh yeah, that is what it means. So I'm like, So I climb up top, I look down, there's no water, not a drop of water in that booster tank. And it's now 1:00 in the afternoon. And that check was supposed to be done at 7 a.m. And I was like, son of a bitch. Right. So I'm not happy. I'm not happy at all. Right. Especially because that driver, I've had to have other conversations with him about other things. And so now there's a pattern. So then it's like, well, now I'm not happy with his lieutenant. Right. So I'm thinking about all the different conversations I'm going to have. And I go into the hospital, I let them know they're there. And then I come back out, I'm helping clean up the ambulance. So we're there like 21 minutes. And I'm like, all right, I think we've done everything. I think we've helped. Let's go back. And so I tell the driver, I'm like, hey, I was calling Dave. Hey, Dave, on the way out, why don't you spot a hydrant? I want to do a blitz attack scenario. And he's like, well, we're not even in our county. Like, we're like a mile outside of our county, because that's where the hospital is located. And I'm like, oh, I know, but let's just like this one's got different threads on it because it's not a county hydrant. So when's the last time you did that? He's like, I don't think I've ever done a non-county hydrant. I'm like, perfect. We got an adapter for that. Let's do it. So we do it. We send the guy up to put the deck on in service. He has none of them have any clue what we're really doing. And he goes to put it in pump and charges the deck on, and obviously no water comes out. And he keeps revving it up, and he hits the RPM limit. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, what is happening right now to you? Like, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I can't get any water out of the truck. I'm like, is there water in the truck? And he goes, yeah, there's water in the truck. I'm like, how do you know? And he's like, shit, I don't know. Right. Like, all those assumptions that when you show up, there will be water in the truck. And if you've ever had an assumption screw you, then that probably became a pretty strong habit of like, I will never let that happen again. And the reason you did is you didn't like how you felt doing it. And the worse the shaming publicly, like the worse the error, the more likely the behavior is going to get fixed. Right. And so we know that internalized. So unfortunately, we then do that to people, right? Instead of creating situations that invoke guilt, which is an internally felt sensation of like, I'm guilty of this, which reflects ownership, which reflects autonomy. I could have done something about this, but I didn't. So I'm guilty of this. This outcome is related to my is related to my performance. I need to fix this. We shame people instead. And that's externally felt. And that's quite literally the Game of Thrones with the whore walking down the street and then doing the cowbell, shame, shame. It's like we trash talk them and we go after their internal worth. And a lot of times people that are senior firefighters, they can shame people quite well, right? They can lead group shaming. And it's effective, man. It's hell effective. But then they get promoted and they try to do the same thing. And now you're leading from a formal position and you have additional roles and responsibilities and you have different expectations of your performance. And if you keep doing that, it's a great way to end up in a lawsuit. It's a great way for a person to claim that they were being hazed or that they were being harassed or that they were being targeted, especially if they're of a different ethnicity or religion or gender than you. It's an excellent way to call in heat on yourself. So people get scared to say anything to anybody. And that doesn't help with the feedback, doesn't help the performance, certainly doesn't help set the tone for the right culture. And so what the conversations need to be focused on is how do you show people why it mattered in such a way that it induces such a sense of guilt in themselves, which doesn't require any public shaming, mind you. It's a private moment
on their own.
That will change that will change their behavior for the better. And that's the situation we had here. Publicly shame this guy with the other guy. And we would talk about it, right? Like we'd go back to the firehouse. I can't believe Dave did this, guys. Okay, everybody come in here. Look what Dave did. Think about how that's played out in, for different stories for you where you work and how that worked. And then the overtime guy would go back to his, shift and his station. Oh, guys, you're not going to believe what Captain Martin did to Dave. They totally owned him, like totally just embarrassed the crap out of him. That's not what I want, right? So I look at him, I'm like, try to fix this, because at the end of the day, I want him to there's many issues now. It's not just about him not checking the unit out. There's also, you're not recognizing why you're not able to generate pressure. This is now troubleshooting 101. And so now there's all kinds of performance issues into this. So we figure it out. I make him do it again so that he swings and hits in the bread box and he gets it. And so the conversation home is, man, I'm really sorry. Should have caught that. And so I was like, well, why didn't you? What was your rationale for doing it? Well, I started making breakfast for everybody. So it's not selfish, right? He was trying to feed everybody. And then he just didn't do it. And so what that tells me is that he doesn't have the habits. It's not built into him that he does. This isn't a one-off. This is his normal routine. Otherwise, he would have done it. It wasn't a strong enough reason for me to believe that was the reason why he didn't do it. So I said, well, I appreciate your honesty. So you're aware. I'm going to talk with your lieutenant about it, and he's likely going to talk with you about it again. If anything I say or have said or anything he says gives you pause, then circle back with me. But I need you to know this is a big deal, and I'm not happy, right? And so that's the certainty piece. Like he thinks I'm unhappy, I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm not happy. Or if he thinks I'm unhappy and I'm really happy, then I'm going to tell him that too. I'm going to try to. It's about aligning. Right? We don't want to spend any effort worrying about what somebody's thinking. We just want to come out and say it if we can. That way we can move on and be adults. And so I pull the lieutenant in and I'm like, so let me tell you what just happened. And I tell him the story. And obviously he's not pleased either. And he's like, all right, well, I'm gonna go say something. And I'm like, I'm not done. And I pull up an email that I've got going. And I'm like, I need you to read this email that I've been drafting. I've been pining over for the last 3 days. And in there is just story after story after story of where we are not meeting our internalized document of expectations. And it's all feedback from stakeholders outside the station. Like we screwed stuff up on all 3 shifts, big stuff. We weren't meeting the mission in areas. And I looked at him and I was like, do you see the problem here? And he goes, I had no idea that this much stuff was going on and you were shielding us from this. I was like, yeah, that's like, I can't take this hit. Like, this is a big hit. That is such a bad deal not having water on that truck. I mean, my God, that could have killed somebody. It could hurt one of us. It could have killed a citizen. I think you get it's a big deal. I think he gets a big deal. But what I need you to not lose sight of is this is one of a big deal, of many big deals. And I'm tired. I'm tired of this. So, so you know where we stand. You're not doing your job. You're not meeting my expectation. my expectation is you will fix these 3 specific things based on these stories. And this is one of them, what we just talked about. What do you need from me to do it? And he's like, I got it. And I'm like, okay, well, I've told such and such that he's likely going to hear from you. And because he shied away from having conversations with his people because he favored buddy more than boss. And then I was like, and then you tell me what we need to do. If I need to go out and do some training, if I need to send an email out, if I need to do whatever I need to do to support you to do this, let me know. And so he goes and has a private conversation, and then he pulls everybody together and has the group conversation, and he talks about the stories I showed him in the email. And it was really interesting because over the course of the rest of the day, each one of his firefighters came up to me and apologized, not for not having water on the truck, but for the overall lack of buy-in and follow through on some of the stuff that we committed to. Like, they felt guilty, which was great. And they attempted to change any one of them, but he induced a group sense of guilt, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Now, the reason I tell you any of that is because at 5:30 in the morning, guess what we had? First in fire. And guess who was right in charge of that engine? Me. And guess who missed the hydrant on approach? Me, right? Like, it was in tall grass on a rural road, and I missed it. Now, I have a habit, because I've been burned, that I'm going to know where the first and the second hydrant is. So when we pull it up on scene and I'm like, crap, we missed the hydrant, I knew that in another about 200 feet, there was a secondary hydrant. And so real quick was able to communicate to the same driver, mind you, that had to do all this stuff before. Hey, work with the second dude that's coming from the other opposite. You're 200 feet away from a hydrant. That's going to be better than stretching back 400 feet from where we were. It's like, it made sense on approach. It doesn't make sense anymore. And he's like, got it. So we go in, and this house is burning to beat the band. I mean, fire coming out of every orifice. And within 60 seconds, we've got 2 hand lines down, and we've put the entirety of the fire out. I mean, it worked really, like, it was a good fire scene. I mean, it worked really, really well. Now, with that story, like you've heard, I made a mistake. Like, how we conduct ourselves as leaders matters, because we're not going to be perfect. And luckily, I had good habits to back up that mistake, because it wasn't the first time that I had made it. And it would be perfectly reasonable for me to defend, tall grass hit it. It was dark. It was 5:30 in the morning. I didn't know where it was, but I missed the hydrant. That's me. That's on me. And my team was able to overcome my mistake to fix that. And we're in the front yard. Fire chief comes out. Everybody's high-fiving it. Like, everybody saw how much fire it was. You guys are good at your job. It's the comments they got, that they were getting, the feedback they were getting. And then I just remember the moment that they looked at me, like we talked, like you look at your coach, like you look at your dad, like you look at your wife, you look for validation. And they're all looking at me. And I said, guys and girls, nice job. I said, but the only thing I want to add is it feels good to be a hero, but you guys were this fucking close to being a zero. We were this fucking close to being a clown car instead of a fire engine. And I said, and it's not just on one person. I said, because I missed a hydrant, and I'm like, that's on me too. So I hope this illustrates the fact that we have each other's back. And the reason that we enforce what we expect is to help us. It's not to hang one person out. It's for us. And I can, it just felt like the perfect blend of accountability, but still focusing on the positive as well. And I'd love to, I've never asked that driver, maybe I should, like, hey, how did you feel? We would talk about, and what's interesting is, like, the next day you come into the firehouse, the oncoming shift, and you smell fire, right? Even though we wash our gear, you smell, oh, you guys caught a job or whatever. And they were telling the story. They were owning it. Like, despite the fact that we set ourselves up for failure that day, and despite the fact the captain missed the hydrant, we still had a very successful outcome. Why their habits had changed and the usefulness of that to the oncoming shifts. And what I'd love to go back and figure out is, did any of those habits change? And so, point being, we use stories to emphasize what matters and what doesn't matter way more than we realize. It's probably the number one way to transmit culture. And so if you find yourself in a situation in which things are not going well, try to find some stories where things did go well and tell those stories, even if they're not your stories. There's stories of other crews doing things,
Yeah.
because people will listen and they will ask questions, and then hopefully that will update some of that stuff. But I always tell people, hey, like, we put that fire out because I had compassion for a woman on a completely unrelated call hours earlier.
Yeah.
Like, me putting myself in her position and thinking about what it must be like to be so scared for a loved one and then staying behind is what ended up resulting in me donating to ALS providers, which made me drive the engine to pick them up, which made me figure out the engine didn't have any water. Like, you don't have that end result on the fireground without all of those things leading up to it before. And so I joke, do feelings put out fires? And people are like, no. I'm like, yeah, they do. They absolutely do. Like, here's a feeling of compassion that put out a fire later. But really what I'm trying to say is it matters how people feel about themselves and their jobs and the usefulness that they feel or lack thereof. And if you don't believe that, then define complacency for me, which for me is a lack of feeling for something, for some significance. And so that's what I'm fighting every day. So if I have to fix a lack of feeling to prevent you from being complacent, what do I put there in its place? And I have to put a positive feeling in its place. So in my mind, feelings very much put out fires. So that's just one of many instances and stories I could tell you to think about why you do what you do. So I hope any of that was useful, because I know we went all over the place. But
oh yeah, and that's, I think that's a good place to kind of sum it up and wrap it up for this episode. Is, I've heard you talk about that as kind of part of your class is the importance of stories, and it's something that I've really been thinking a lot lately about, and it plays right into all this as well, and getting away from what we're talking about, getting away from, but replacing it with that, replacing it with the stories of why our culture is special, and the stories of this is what it really means to us, and this is why things are important, and this is why we want to be different. And so I think that's a great way just to basically tie it all up and say that, expectations has a place, and it's not that we're saying that you shouldn't do them at all, but there are much more important pieces to that puzzle, and there are much more important things that we should be focusing on, and those are the things that are really going to make a difference between a crew that does the job and a crew that is just above and beyond any other crew, because that's the culture they've created and fight for.
Yeah, 100%. Expectations are a piece of the puzzle, but they are not everything you hang your hat on. And the culture piece that we've been speaking to drives what does and doesn't get done infinitely more than formally stated expectations every day of the week, every day, not even close.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Did not, the conversation definitely did not lack for anything that I look forward to. It was great, and I have a lot to think about for sure. So I appreciate your time and just your knowledge and your willingness to share with everybody. So thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. I always enjoy our conversations, and I appreciate the chance to share the message.
You bet. So you kind of mentioned embrace the resistance at first. Go ahead and tell everybody again kind of where you're at, how to reach you, and whatever else.
Yeah, so you can find the page on Facebook, or you can go to the website. And we've got articles. You'll find, when Jeremy publishes this, you'll find these podcasts. The blog is there, and it's basically just little bits here or there, whether it's something I've said or written, that's just trying to provide some motivation and just letting you know that your experience in leadership is not necessarily as unique as you think it is. You're not the only one that's having trouble, and there are some strategies on there. I try to make it sure there's a lesson in anything. It's not just you venting or bitching. That will help you do better. And the whole idea of embrace resistance is, like, when you open the nozzle, you can expect a counter reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But we teach you strategies to displace that nozzle reaction so you can flow water, because the worst thing you could do is take a nozzle to a fire and just be afraid of that reaction and not open the nozzle, and nothing gets better. Well, that's unfortunately, I think, the state of American fire service leadership is we're afraid of people's reactions. We don't have strategies to displace those or anticipate those. So we don't exert our influence. We don't open our nozzles, so to speak, on employee fires. And we suffer. We all suffer from that. And the citizens suffer from that. So our idea, our mindset is develop leaders that are prepared to recognize and anticipate that resistance and then have strategies to mitigate it and truly embrace it, and knowing that they're doing a good job, whether they're trying to change a culture like what we've been talking about, or whether they're just trying to get the truck or ladder or rescue, whatever, set up most efficiently for the citizens, whatever that looks like. We're embracing resistance that's going to come with changing things for the better. My email's on there, my phone number's on there. Would love to have conversations to reach out. And when the conference season gets spun back up, you can find the presentations on pretty much all the major ones. And make sure you come up and let us know where you heard about it, and because that stuff matters to me and it matters to Jeremy. So much of what we do and say feels like it's in a vacuum where it's not getting to people's ears. And I don't ever want to waste anybody's time, but every once in a while we get some feedback that it feels really good, and it lets us know that we're helping, or that we're not helping, and we need to change the message a little bit and be mindful of stuff. And that feedback's really important to us. So hopefully, if you have a chance to see it, you'll come out and let us know what you think.
All right. I again appreciate it. I appreciate your friendship, and always look forward to more discussion. So thank you, and keep it going, man. Thank you for everything you're doing, making fire service better.
Awesome. You as well, my friend. You as well. I'm riding your coattails.
Right. All right, everybody. Thank you for your time, and hope you got something out of it. I hope you got a fraction of what I got out of it, because I got a lot. But look forward to meeting you next time. And until then, stay humble and do work.